All right, this is a meeting brief for the special meeting on March 28th, 2022 at 6 p.m. And so tomorrow I'm putting up this video early because I got the packets out early. Tomorrow we have the annual meeting on March 19th about the salary resolutions and the voting of the electors on the salaries of the elected officials. This one is for Monday, March 28th. And some big things here. This is the budget hearing, so the 2022-2023 budget hearing. And the hearing is where people can make their comments and everything. There's public comment. I left that in here as well. But the hearing itself is also a comment section. And I included in the packet, which is posted online, all of the numbers, and they've been in some of the previous packets recently as well. But the numbers in here have been updated with the view of making the budget better and more accurate. And so which they are still conjecture, of course, moving into the future, estimates about the future. And this has us, and it looks like we'll come out on the positive this year, which last year when we were making the budget, we had ourselves estimated at a negative $390,000, and as of this, which is on the 15th from a couple of days ago, 3 days ago, had us in the positive by $212,000, and so that's pretty decent. The difference for making that up looks like because the road commission didn't get to some of the road projects they had planned for this last year, and we started doing some property sales. And so those two things are why that number has ended up that way. For next year, it is projected in the positive at $80,000. And so that's decent. We'll see if it adjusts at the meeting. People can make their comments, concerns, everything heard, criticisms about the budget at the hearing, and then we move on to the actual resolution of 2022-13 to adopt the budget by the board, right? And so that's the decision made by the board itself. Before, it was unusual because in the annual meeting of the electors, where all of the electors in the room that show up were voting, they were voting on the entire budget, but on process that probably shouldn't have been occurring. They should be voting on salaries as a mechanism to stop the elected officials from giving themselves large salary increases. So a good process when it's used for that. But then the board actually votes on the budget, but there should be a hearing and comment and criticism section for that. So that's in here as well, which is part of why this moved, because I was reading that resolution and making sure we had everything in there, and then I saw that we didn't have one of the postings that we should have, a publication that we should have, and so we had to get that done, and that's why this is on the 28th. And then we have the treasurer position, and so that resignation goes into effect March 30th, so just a couple of days after this meeting, and this meeting is 10 days from now, so the resignation is 12 days from now. And so that is, I'm sure, stirring up some stuff. We have one person that has turned in a nominating petition because there's going to be an election for the treasurer position. So there will be the primary among the two separate parties, and of course there are other parties, Libertarian, Independent, and that type of stuff. But there's obviously the main two parties that dominate American political structure, with the Democrats and the Republicans. So the primary for them in August, and then the general election in November, same structure as the governor for as far as the election is concerned. So that election is going to take place for the treasurer. That's why it's not a hired position, because people think it should be something like interviewing candidates and then hiring an employee, and I actually agree that I think it should be structured like that, but it's not structured like that by state law. Now, villages and cities are structured like that, where you can have the clerk and the treasurer hired, and thus you start separating some of just the administrative work that needs to be done from the politics, which creates all this factioning and all these bad things. Politics corrupts whatever it touches because it's politics, and that's how it works, and it tends to attract bad people because there's a horrible self-selection bias, there's a horrible feedback mechanism in it, and I think the saying is both fairly true from Lower to Acton and widely known that power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so that having the politicians in some of these roles is not ideal, but that is the way it is set up by state law. So the election has to take place, but something has to be done before that, obviously. And so there's a couple of different options, and they're well, it could go well, but there's also the possibility of it not going well. So the most obvious one and the most natural one, I would say, is an appointment to the vacancy. Basically, the board decides, the board votes on appointing someone to that spot, and then they are in that position until the election goes through, and whoever wins the election is then in that position. And so if you appoint a person that then wins the election, it'll be the same person until the new election in 2024. If you appoint someone and someone else wins the election, then you'll have someone until November 20th of 2022, and then it'll switch over to the person that got elected. And so that it could go either way. There's only one person that has a nominating petition in right now. The county could call a special election, and so some people have brought this up with the county putting someone in and that type of stuff. The board of county election commissioners can do a quorum appointment if there's not enough people to have a quorum, but there is if you had like an entire board resign, something like that. So that doesn't apply in this case. But the county could call a special election if the position wasn't filled by the cutoff date, which is 45 days, which is May 16th. Now, there are a few issues with that. One is that them calling the special election, you're getting close to the regular elections in August and November. And some of these dates then overlap because there's only 135 days before the next election cycle and stuff. And so the laws apparently don't specifically address what happens in that time frame if that situation occurs. So definitely not ideal, but it's significantly worse than that, so it shouldn't need to be dealt with. If the township doesn't have a treasurer, we don't have a process for paying things. We need a clerk and a treasurer to sign things and issue payments. That's part of the financial process of a township. And so if we didn't pay anything until May 16th, then obviously we would lose all of our employees for one, and then we wouldn't have anyone in the zoning department, we wouldn't have anyone in maintenance, we wouldn't have probably any firefighters, we wouldn't have the office administrative assistants, and I don't know who would all go or who would not go, but that's a long period of time. And so if they're expecting a paycheck because they have a mortgage to pay and their own bills to pay, and then the township doesn't have a process in place for paying people, obviously that goes horrible. And then as we miss other bills, there'll be other trouble as well. So it's just that's a extremely ridiculous path to take. And then there's the idea of the deputy treasurer, and I've heard this brought up, and I've looked at this before, and MTA, the Michigan Townships Association, says that the deputy treasurer takes over if the treasurer gets sick or if they die, something like that. But if the treasurer resigns, right, and this goes for supervisor with their deputy and the clerk with their deputy as well, in the case of a resignation, a deputy doesn't take over. And that's basically the case where the deputy doesn't take over, according to the MTA. Now, the township lawyer did find a 1976 Attorney General opinion opinion number 5,802. And that states that it would be treated in the same way as a death, which is interesting, in that a deputy could fill that position for a while. And then there is the option of a temporary appointment for an interim, but that would essentially be the same thing as the appointment. Technically, the interim, I think they don't end up with voting rights. There's some small difference there, but because we're only going to have a period of time until the election anyways, it's going to be interim of finishing out this term through November 20th of 2022 and starting the 2 years to finish out this full 4-year term, and then they'll be back on the regular cycle for another election. So that is what that is, and the way that is drawn up. And so on March 28th, we'll have the budget hearing, the budget resolution, and the township board will decide what we're doing with the treasurer position. And so decently big meeting, important things happening, not a huge agenda list. And it's one of those meetings that it could go a long time if it gets bogged down in debating some of the numbers of the budget. That's why I like to have working sessions, and we had a working session to go through those things, and hopefully they're resolved. And the board directed me to just worked that stuff out, and so I've worked on making that good, right? The budget decent in here, and so it could go relatively fast depending on how many comments there are, how many people come, and how much the board debates on that, or it could get bogged down. It's hard to say. And then the treasurer position could be similar in that people could have a lot of debate over it, and with the limited options that are there, I see that. It's one of those things like the budget is if you're spending something on one thing, you can't spend it on another thing. So it's a trade-off, and so they're hard decisions to make, and everyone has different priorities, and so it ends up becoming very debatable. And so it could get bogged down into debate. I don't see a ton of options for process. There are some legal complexities to it that I've been sorting through over the last week, but it's pretty straightforward that an appointment probably makes the most sense moving forward and puts us on the most stable legal ground. And so it could move through pretty quickly as well. And hard to determine on this thing, just like the meeting about tomorrow. And I'm expecting to catch some kickback because change the process, try to make it right, essentially. And so we're just doing the salary resolutions where they aren't scheduled for a raise for the elected officials, and so it could go very smooth, but it could get bogged down if people have a lot of questions. And so people ask me times on meetings, like how long is this meeting going to be? And it's very hard to determine because of that. It depends on how much discussion people want to have at the meeting around these items. And I know some municipalities, they give very little information, and then in their meetings move very quickly, and people in general, they just vote yes, and everything was taken care of beforehand, and it goes through. And I've been attempting not to do that, to have decent discussion in the meetings, to release a lot of information, more than a lot of people are comfortable with, but I still like that. And so in that case, if people are coming informed on these things and they want to ask a lot of questions, or they have a lot of concerns or criticisms or something that they think should be different, it could get extended out. And same thing among the board if the board has a lot to discuss. And so they could go either way on that as far as time. So not exactly sure, but they could go quickly. So we will see. Anyways, if anyone has any questions, let me know. The reason I'm getting the March 28th packet out early is because I wanted people to try to have it a little longer. It's difficult to get the packets out too much earlier because you can keep collecting information, and then you can end up with things that are older than you would like them to be before the board is voting on them. So I get them that Wednesday before the Monday meeting normally. This is coming out Friday, with 2 weekends in between and an entire week for people to review. And I think that longer review might be good. And then also because we have the annual meeting tomorrow, people might have some questions about the budget, even though that's not what the budget is. The budget isn't on the schedule. The hearing is on the 28th itself. And so it's available for people to look up if they want to for that. And so a little bit longer to review. And there's a lot of numbers to look through, which some people enjoy and some people find boring, but there's definitely enough time for people to look through them. So anything else, let me know. Thanks. Bye.